Okay, hi Mr. Cardine. My book was Freakonomics by Stephen D. Levitt and Stephen J. Dubner. I'm going to start off by talking about Chapter 4 of the book. Chapter 4 is called Where Have All the Criminals Gone? And it begins by talking about how in 1966, the communist dictator of Romania not only banned abortion, but also contraception and sex education. This went on for some time, and Romania's population had the desired effect, and it boomed. The population went up drastically. However, the dictator's actions would come back to haunt him. In 1989, thousands of young people aged 13 to 20 protested the corrosive regime, and ultimately that ended in the dictator's death. He was killed by children who, were it not for his abortion ban, would never have been born at all. Then Levitt begins to describe how he discovered a strong link between the legalization of abortion in the United States and the sharp decline in violent crime that the nation saw in the 1990s. He goes on to explain that women getting abortions were mostly women who couldn't provide the child with a stable environment, thus preventing those children from growing up poor in more violent areas, and that directly correlated to the violent crime decrease. Chapter 5 was called What Makes a Perfect Parent. Levitt explores his claim that people don't use data to make conclusions, and that we're more predetermined beliefs. We use more predetermined beliefs and biases, things that we hear, things that we believe, rather than actual data. He goes on to say that this is most evident in parenting. Levitt is able to determine that genetics play a vital role and that a child's race doesn't determine its financial future. And he also determines that who you are, so talking about where you are in life, when you have the baby, what your job is, what class you're in, matters more than what you do as a parent. So putting your kid in Head Start, making sure you read to your child at night, those things don't really have as high of an effect as if, say, the baby was adopted. So who you are matters more than what you do when it comes to parenting. So socioeconomic status is a greater indicator of a child's academic outcome than anything else. Chapter 6 was my favorite chapter. I thought it was the most interesting chapter in the book, and it was called Parenting Part 2, or Would a Rashonda by any other name smell as sweet? And this chapter talks specifically about how a child's name has an effect on their success in life, in everything. The author especially focuses on African American names, so, names like Rashonda or Shaniqua or, kind of lower class sounding names. And he uses decades of name data from California birth records to show an interesting trend that's seen when they're applying for jobs. And he interestingly found that job offers were extended to those to people with more white sounding names than black sounding names. So an Emily was much more likely to get the job than Rashonda. A black name was also linked to a lot of negative outcomes in terms of income and education. So because of their name, they don't do as well in life because it sounds low class. Then Levitt talks about the pattern of how names migrate, and I thought this was probably the most interesting part of the book for me. He talks about how names that are popular in rich, educated, high-class social classes, names like, Alexandria, Madison, names will be popular, for a few years in the higher social classes, and then eventually they migrate. And, excuse me, and these names will show up in being seen in lower classes. So as they kind of die out in the higher class, you see them work their way down the social classes until a few years later, all of the poorer classes are naming their kids Alexandria, Madison, these names that used to be thought of as high-class names, but are now more low-class names because of the way they migrated. After the people in higher classes have moved on to bigger, better, newer names, But then it also talked about these, he started off his epilogue talking about, it's called Two Paths to Harvard, and I didn't really find the epilogue very interesting until the very end, where he talks about these two boys that he brought up in the introduction, and the two boys, one white, one black, well, they were described in chapter 5, excuse me, described in chapter 5, when he was talking about how race doesn't determine financial standings. But he described a white boy who grew up, outside Chicago, had a smart, encouraging family, who stressed, education and all this stuff. And this black boy from Daytona Beach who was abandoned by his mother, beaten by his father, who was a gangster by his teens. And he kind of tells us what became of these two boys just to prove that, race doesn't have any effect on your financial situation or socioeconomic station in life at all. And he goes on to say the second child, the black boy, is Roland G. Fryer Jr., who's a Harvard economist studying black underachievement. And the white boy also made it to Harvard, but soon after things kind of took a turn for the worst. His name is Ted Kaczynski, who was a murderer. So I thought that was really interesting, and I really liked this book. I thought that it was really interesting to see the parallels between cause and effect. But anyway, that was Freakonomics. Thank you.